Hi, everybody. I'm Doni Aldine, the creator and founder of the An Intimate Conversation with Women of Color podcast, which is sponsored by Donie Consults. This podcast was created to provide women of color a platform to use our voices. So thank you so much for stopping by and enjoy today's episode. Welcome to another episode of An Intimate Conversation with Women of Color. I am your host, Doni Aldine, and whether you're tapping in from YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, we thank you. We so greatly appreciate you coming back, checking out the episodes, and sharing the episodes as well is greatly appreciated. So continue to do so. Continue to listen or watch, subscribe if you haven't done so, and definitely share. The goal is to reach millions of women of color, to elevate their voices. And so that's where we would need your help. So I'm excited for today's guest. And she is actually, we're going to celebrate her. She is the last guest for season 3. So for 2022, I'm excited to talk to and introduce you all to Doni Aldine. She is a founder. She is a globally mobile Afro-Latina and first-generation American who, by age 19, lived in and identified with 7 cultures on 5 continents. Doni, what else do you want the audience to know about you?
That's a good question.
Right?
Wow, that's an open question. I don't know if you want all that. That's a lot
well,
of tea.
Just what you want them to know. Now, not everything there is to know. But just a little bit of what you want folks to know.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm actually super excited to be on, and I love being in the kitchen.
Right? Yes.
We're going to drink some of this tea here. Yes.
Coffee. I'm a coffee drinker.
It's funny you say that. Now that fall is starting, I'm going to try to get into tea. So,
Okay.
So what else do I want them to know about me? So really the answer to the question will give you all the additional, right? So as founder of Culture's Lifestyle Network, I'm also editor-in-chief of Culture's Global Multicultural magazine. And that's a direct result of my background and the research I've done. I actually taught a class on this for 12 years at Colorado State University. And so my whole purpose, and I feel like my life purpose, is to help people feel like they belong, especially people who are quote unquote in between. And so by in between, what I mean is those who are multicultural, multi-ethnic, mixed race, and geographically mobile. Geographically mobile people are third culture kids. We'll probably go over that at some point. Of course, we see a lot. See, this used to be really in my world, but now it's so prevalent for everyone, but refugees, immigrants, and migrants. And we can't turn around without a story on any of those populations right now, right? So much is going on in the world. And it's interesting to watch because having grown up on 5 continents, that was just part of my everyday. And so these people who are in between, they're in between culture in some way. They have a foot in 2 or more cultural worlds. That's what we focus on at Cultures. And again, that's what I feel like is my life purpose. So that fits right back into your original question. So what does that mean, identifying with 7 cultures? So I am Trinidadian Costa Rican, so I'm Afro-Latina. And I was born in New York City and at age 2 weeks moved to Trinidad and Tobago. And then that was my first accent. And then moved to Spain at, I think, 4. So from there, moved to 5 different continents. I mean, lived in Asia, did not live in Africa or Australia, but Asia, Europe, South America, Central America. I count Central America as a continent since I'm from there.
Gotta shout it out. Oh, and by the way, happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Thank you.
Afro-Latina Month. How about that?
Thank you. Yes. It's really a big deal. It's something For me, my life, I feel it's living in those margins, right? And that's why I want to create enhanced community and create human connection or foster human connection for people in those in between spaces, because you're always in that shade of gray. You'll notice for cultures, our colors are black, white, and shades of gray, because that's where we live, right? It's not all black and white. And especially being in the US, I'm a US citizen, as well as that of the two other countries that I come from. Um, it's the way that being multicultural is viewed usually is about race, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas for me, it's about culture. Mm-hmm. And you can just look at me and tell, yes, I'm Black.
Right.
And I'm Latina. So what does that mean? How do I fit in these boxes that we've created? In addition to growing up, in Europe, in Asia, in North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and those values that you learn when you're young and how they shape how you think as you get older. It's so funny. I just got a call from a VP of diversity and inclusion at a university yesterday to do some consulting. And this person happens to be not only from the Caribbean, but from Trinidad and Tobago. First of all, let me tell you, that never happens.
Right?
Never happens. And we had a brief chat just about what they are dealing with their team. Okay. And I fully understood, which is something I cherish, because you don't get understood in spaces all the time, right? So she doesn't get to speak with someone who has university experience, research experience, DEI experience, and global experience that mirrors hers, that would understand when she says a sentence, there's meaning underneath there that I am able to pick up, that someone who, let's say, is completely African American may not pick up, right? Yeah. And there's a level of understanding that we hope to offer at Cultures, that feeling of belonging, that feeling of being heard, feeling seen, that often isn't offered in your day-to-day life. So that's the full answer to your question.
Right. And you know what? And so as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about a situation that I was in. So I was part of a book club for the anti-racism, I think is the name of the book, but that one, how to be an anti-racist.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, I was the only person of color on this call. And I remember telling, them that the people on the call that, we have the same issues as they do. So all white folks for the most part. So we have the same issues, but then add on a layer of this, that, and the other. And so for you, you're adding on layers on top of my layers, So listening to what you're saying, all the different layers that, we walk around with, and it absolutely has to be heavy. So as an Afro-Latina, having, going through all of these different spaces, again, your focus is more so on culture and less about the race aspect, but how has your role being an Afro-Latina, how has it played out in your various experiences, or which is the most noticeable experience for you that your Afro-Latina-ness played a role?
Wow. The most notable.
Maybe Spain. I'm just kind of, based off of the places in Asia, maybe Spain and Asia really stood out, because those are not, they're white and Asian spaces.
Well, believe it, when you put it that way, I'd have to say it's the United States.
Well, yeah. Oh, well.
Like, that's a surprise, right?
Right.
No, the United States, because, it's interesting. Okay, so I just came off of 2 years in South America. So my father is the one who's Costa Rican, and actually my father is dark-skinned. Okay. My mother's Trinidadian, and she's of African, indigenous descent. And she's probably your skin tone. And she's older now. So as you get older, you get a little darker, but around the same coloring. So it's interesting because people expect him to be the light-skinned one, right? The lighter shade of brown. And so he passed away, unfortunately, of COVID in 2020. He was fighting cancer and had to go to chemo in the hospital every week in New York City. And on a Thursday contracted COVID, and by Easter Sunday, he was gone. So I always, as you mentioned, I lived in Spain when I was little, and I decided to learn French at the time because, I was like, everybody speaks Spanish. I like, this is so boring. I want
something different. Of course.
As an adult, I'm like, what was I thinking? Mm-hmm. But because I could use Spanish literally every day, right? In my current life, I'm sure we'll get to that. I use French and German as well, which I ended up going to college in Germany. So I did not learn the Spanish, but now I speak it, and now I use it pretty much every day, even in the US. But so anyway, as he passed away, I always had intended one day to just show up speaking Spanish and shock my dad, and just he wouldn't have said anything, but he would have been so happy. He would have been so happy. And I just never brought that to completion. So as soon as he passed away, I felt like it was a mission that I had to continue. Right now in the magazine, it's the Year of Latin America, part of a tribute to him, which started with George Floyd, and all the things that happened in the US. So anyway, the reason I say that is because I spent the last two years in South America, and I just got off of a 5-continent world tour for our 5th anniversary of the magazine. So those are fresh experiences.
Yeah.
Fresh experiences. And I have to say, the US is the one where it stands out the most, right? When I'm in Colombia, in Argentina, I was shocked. I really thought, because Argentina is very European, and most of the Latin people down there, well, not even, people often don't know the difference between Hispanic and Latin.
Correct.
Right?
Latin.
Yes. So Hispanic is usually more about language, right? So people from Spain would be Hispanic, but Latin is more about location or geography. So anything south of the United States, that's Latin America, right? So if you think of it that way, Brazil is not Hispanic because they don't speak Spanish, but Spain is not Latin because geographically it's not in the correct place. But the way people think of it, Buenos Aires or Argentina would be more more Hispanic because people look very European. The attitude is very European down there. And I was really shocked not to have issues in Argentina, to tell you the truth, right? Colombia, there's spaces where there are wider Latinos and white or Latinos, and then also darker Latinos on the coast, and Cartagena and Cali, things like that. Of course, big African populations down in Colombia as well. And of course, didn't have issues there. Peru, which, as you go a little south, it's like Colorado where I live now. There's fewer brown people, but still had such lovely, lovely experiences. Then, of course, there's Costa Rica, my homeland, one of my homelands. But it's the US that stands out. This is where it's because of how things have developed in the US. Slavery was everywhere, but how we've dealt with it in the US to now. And you see Britain dealing with this a little bit. Things are starting to come home to roost, right? Meghan Markle really threw some things in there for them. But yeah, it's definitely the United States, and how we approach culture versus color versus and multiculturalism, what that means. This is definitely the place where I have the most pointed experiences.
Yeah. And so, of course, it didn't surprise me, like you said, because when you were talking about the boxes, we definitely put people in a box here. Like, you have to choose this, like, you have to be this thing. And so it forces people. I remember being, I don't know, in a class with a woman who was from, I'll just say, St. Lucia. She was from an island, and she said, you know what, they were just that island, right?
Yes.
I'm, whatever they're called. I don't think it's St. Lucians, but I'll just say St. Lucians, right? That's what they were. That's how they identified until they came to the US, and they're like, no, you have to check Black,
you're Black. And you're like, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. And then also, when you were talking about how people don't know the difference between Hispanic and Latino. Absolutely, because I was so confused with that for a while. I worked in diversity and inclusion, and one of my segments was Hispanic and Latino. And then I finally understood, right? I saw something. It may have even been a social media post that broke it down. And I'm like, okay, I get it now, because it was just so hard to wrap my mind around. And then it was also somewhat startling because I remember someone who identified as Hispanic and or Latino, a male, and he was upset that they again put people in this box of, well, you're a person of color. And and his thing is he's not.
Because where was he from? Was he from the US?
He's from the US. Well, he lives in the US. And so that was another, wrench thrown in, because it's like, you're right. Like Spain, they're white. Right? So you have Hispanic people who they're white. And so now you got to grapple with that. Like, wait a minute, I'm so confused. What do you mean they're white? Because, Hispanic and Latino is not a race.
And even so, as you mentioned about the woman from St. Lucia, I have so my team is very diverse. And I have our art director worked with me in Colorado, and she's now gone back to her hometown in Merida, Mexico. And so it was interesting when she first came to Colorado and people were asking her questions about how does it feel to be a woman of color? And she's like, what are you talking about? Right? And she's brown. But like the countries that I grew up in, you're just you. So she was Mexican. She was very proud of being Mexican. But she didn't understand why people were considering her a person of color, why she was supposedly minoritized. However, by the time she left, she was radical.
Hey, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she got it, and she saw, and she had experiences that I can't even identify with, right? Because I live in a place where being Mexican is not necessarily always a place where you'll have good experiences. So she saw why people asked her those questions and why she should be cognizant of them. But when she's in Mexico, she doesn't have to deal with that. As a matter of fact, we had to talk about it with the magazine because we make a point. The visual diversity and the hidden diversity of the articles and all the visuals in the magazine, we really pay attention to who's being represented in every single issue. And I had to have a chat with her because everybody was like this medium brown color. I was like, we gotta switch it up. She's like, I'm so sorry, I know better, but where she lives, that's what she sees. And so that's what she was portraying in the art as we were doing layouts. She doesn't do that anymore, but people don't think about it, and you need to think about it. It has to be top of mind so we can make a difference.
Yeah, and that's something that I dealt with too, being in the D&I space and actually having several different segments that I work with. I wanted to make sure that those segments, whenever we're doing any type of ad or whatnot, that the people look like whatever that segment is. So whatever, kind of communicates that this person is, Hispanic, Latino, let's see that, and LGBTQ plus, let's kind of see that as well. But, no ambiguous folks. Like, I was really a stickler about that, like we need to change it up because we want people to know. And even with, my peers who may have had, people with disability, again, there's some, let us make sure that we're showing and creating that, and so that people see themselves. And that's really what it was about, making sure that people see themselves.
Right. With you 100%.
Yeah. So what is this global multicultural lifestyle network?
So I really believe I was born to do this. And it's so funny. I don't know if you believe in this, but I was on social yesterday, and if it weren't for what I do, I probably wouldn't be on social media, but I'm grateful that I have to be, because sometimes it just lifts you up, man. It lifts you up. And so yesterday, for what I believe the messages come as they should, right? And I kept getting these messages saying, hey, hang in there, don't give up. And so I say that because going back to our original, your original question and me talking about creating space, enhancing community and fostering human connection for that in-between space. Whew, it's a big job, right? I mean, people don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
As you say, they always want to make you choose. And to have to speak up about all that all the time it can be exhausting, right? And then I have to remember how lucky I am that I have this team and this crew, and I get to see these stories of these amazing people all over the world who live in these in-between spaces, right? So the Global Multicultural Network is media, products, and experiences to do just that, to enhance community and foster human connection for people in those in-between spaces, focused on people of color. Okay. And that's important because there are a number of people who are white, as you mentioned, this Hispanic person who was like, why do y'all keep calling me a person of color? Who are white, or even we had on the cover of one of our magazines, Patty Jenkins, who is the director of Wonder Woman, and I had the pleasure of working with her. And she's white, but she has a multicultural upbringing, and at age 6 months moved to Asia and spent a lot of her youth in Asia and Southeast Asia, and then also in Germany, and then in Kansas, I think it is. And so here's a white woman who, again, is in that in-between space because of how she was raised. So she doesn't think the same as everyone else. However, like I said, we still focus on people of color because people of color typically get the shorter end of the stick, right? No one focuses on this. There's not a place where you can go and expect to see your people who look like you all the time. There's the Ebonies, there's the Essences, the Latina magazines, but for cultures, we really focus on that in-between space. So some of our people are ambiguous, right? If you get mixed race people. But so the media would be our podcasts, which I should have you on. Our podcasts, our magazine, our TV show with XOTV, all of our media, our digital publications, our web publication, which focuses on those in-between spaces and really having that nuance of hidden and visual diversity, right? Yeah. Then the products, girl, the products. So they are curated specifically for, again, the same focus, enhancing community, bringing culture to your door. So we have an award-winning cultural dinner party kit called Culture Celebrations, where we tell you everything you need to make a cultural dinner party. So for instance, our first one was Kenya. And so it has all the recipes. We have videos on how to make the food, very quick, short ones to make sure that you're making them right. Excuse me. Invitations, thank you notes, place cards, everything to set up your party, and tells you what, when, and how to do it. Okay, so that's one of the products that you can get when you're a member of our community, or you could even purchase those in stores. Actually, we have a global bath and body. So every single issue of Cultures magazine has a destination, and as I mentioned, this is the year of Latin America. Thank you, Daddy. And so each destination this year is always going to be in Latin America. Starting next year, we have Turkey coming up, always somewhere great and interesting, but always people that you can relate to as well. So each of those destinations, we create a special scent of bath and body products, all natural, all handcrafted in the Rocky Mountains, to really give you the feel of being in that place, right? So Ciudad de Mexico, which Mexico City is the next one that's coming up. And we give you the colors, the sights, the sounds in the scent that you feel and slather on your body of these fantastic bath and body products. And the packaging is gorgeous. Next, we have, I'll just give you one more example, our hidden diversity greeting cards. So greeting cards from the point of view of this population that we're talking about, always featuring people of color. So those are the products that go along with the media, and there's more, but basically a whole line of products to celebrate who you are, right? And then lastly, it's the experiences. It's the university class that I developed about these in-between spaces. It's speaking to corporations around the world. I had a talk with the U.S. Foreign Service in Japan, and it was so enlightening and opened many eyes for them, because they were raising children who this really would affect, but they didn't realize what kind of effect it would have on their children. Or even Amazon, bringing a different perspective, diversity, again, a nuance, not a broader definition of diversity, but a more nuanced definition. So yeah, the speaking, and then of course we have global experiences or travel that we curate with small groups, and people can come with us and learn about different cultures. So that is the Lifestyle Network. And there's a membership where we can bring that to your door every quarter. So that's what we do.
That is absolutely awesome. So, I'm listening to you and then I'm thinking, so your team, are they all in Colorado or are they all around? Because I'm just not really getting a lot of diversity in Colorado. That's just me. I'm just like,
that's why I said it's very much like Buenos Aires.
Right? Like those who are just listening, you're like missing my facial expressions or me like nodding my head with things or whatever. But yeah, I'm just sitting here and I'm like hearing all this great colorful stuff. And I'm just like, but she's in Colorado.
Colorado, no. So we have a headquarters in Denver, in New York, and actually,
okay.
I just spent 3 months in Buenos Aires to decide if we were going to have a headquarters there. I might switch it to Sao Paulo, except I don't speak Portuguese, so I don't know. It's a tough decision. But our team is we have 100 people in 17 countries. Okay. So yeah, we don't play when we say globally diverse. Okay. Yes, we have all the things. So now it's normal to have remote jobs and hybrid jobs. When we did that before, it's like people didn't understand. Like, I don't get it. Like, you want me to work from home, or you want me to, and that's the places where we have headquarters, we have offices. But other than that, you work from home. But our team really embraces it. So
yes, no, I'm loving all of that. I'm trying to think. Oh, so here's what I'm also wondering. So you lived in Spain, but when you lived in Spain, you didn't speak Spanish?
Well, I was a child. So I had my Trinidadian accent at the time. So I know it's funny. It's really funny. I just interviewed the president of this tequila company from Mexico 2 days ago. And he was laughing because he said, oh, I made some response to him. He said, oh, you say that like a Mexican, not like an American. And I was laughing because often, because of all the places I grew up, I didn't go over all of the names, but all of the different places, the way I think is different, right? Yeah. And the way I sound sometimes is different. So I sound very American. My accent is very American. And now that I've been in the States for so long, right? Like the last 2 years, I wasn't. But before that, when I was married, decades here, right? I'm a true American. But so it sounds that way, but every once in a while, something will slip out, sound a little wonky. It's really, it's really something that is important for us to stay global and yeah. So that's why our team is all over. I feel like, what else was I going to say? Oh, sorry. I was looking at one of your questions and it got me off track. I'm sorry about that. You were asking about my name and it totally my thought process went away. So anyway, but I didn't speak Spanish at the time because I was a child. And so I decided that, I don't know, I thought French was exotic. I don't know why I picked French. I liked it. I thought it sounded good. I'm glad I did it, but I wish, one of my adult goals is to be a polyglot. And so in my travels, I get to go to France a few times a year for different conferences. And then I'm usually in Switzerland. I haven't been back to Germany. I need to make a point to go there, but I do use German typically in Switzerland. And so I'm grateful to have those, but I don't use them very often. So that's my next thing. After I've gotten, perfected my Spanish to a certain level, I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm using those other languages regularly.
So you might appreciate this, but outside of the US, my number one audience base is in Germany.
Get out! That's so one of our biggest audience bases is India. That's interesting. So why Germany, do you think?
Well, you know what? Because I had a colleague that's where she lives, and so she loves it. She shares it with other people. The other one is Slovakia. Same thing. There's a colleague who lives there, and so I know that it stems from them. The third one is, what is the third one? Is it Barbados? I think it might be Barbados, and I say that, oh, that's Rihanna. Like Rihanna's, she's listening from Barbados, but yeah.
Well, my stepmother is Barbadian, my dad's wife, and she actually was part of the ruling family for a long time when Danita in Barbados was alive. And actually, I think she knows Rihanna's family. I mean, it's a small island, and she was very well connected. So interesting. Well, what you're saying, though, really speaks to every time we have a new issue and it has a new destination, that destination ends up being one of our top countries.
Yeah.
Because people
makes sense.
Yes. I totally get it. Well, I love that. I lived in Berlin, I lived in Munich, and which, let me tell you, learning German in Munich is like learning English in the deep south. And then going to college in Berlin, which is like New York City. It took me a week. I was like, are y'all speaking German?
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. So I'm up here trying to think. So I think the third one is Pakistan, and then the fourth one is Barbados.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I will have to make sure that my stepmother is aware of that. You'll be very proud. Very proud.
Yes, awesome. So so you got sidetracked looking at, so is Ambrosine, is that your name?
So it used to be my last name. My name is Aldine. Yes. It's so funny. It just popped up, and then my thought process went out the window.
I know, because I saw it somewhere, and I'm like, okay, but I'm not seeing how this relates to anything. And let me ask her about that. So let's go ahead and jump into some action steps. And so, we're talking about Black women. We're talking about women of color. You have such a vast experience, right? You've been all over. You're global. Based on some of the things that we've already talked about, you probably will answer this based on Black women in the U.S., but feel free to answer based on Black women elsewhere, and or women of color in general elsewhere. But what do you say to Black and other women of color who haven't tapped into their power and voice? What 3 actions will help them to own both? And do identify who you're talking about, right? Are you talking about women in Costa Rica? Are you talking about women in, identify that.
Okay, 3 things to tap into your power and voice. The reason I say, wow, that is such a good question, because our experiences and our willingness to try something new, not always, but often, is based on where we grew up, on our environment, right? The things around us, the people around us, the culture that we've learned. And let me give a little bit of context to that. When I say the culture we've learned, often we think things and we don't realize it's part of our culture. I'm trying to think of an example. It happens to me all the time, right? All the time. And I have to pause and show the person that they think that way because of where they live, that other people don't necessarily think that way. And their minds are always blown. And of course, right now, I can't think of an example. This is not a very strong example, but I think hopefully it'll show the point. So the Pledge of Allegiance in the United States, right? I was just at the Denver Broncos game, and at the beginning of the game, you say the pledge, everybody stands, puts their hands on their hearts. And I was in a particular room, and there were a few people who were foreign nationals, and they didn't do this, right? And that's the same as how I grew up. But I could definitely tell you the other countries I lived in, they would have felt like it was cultish to stand up and do this. But in the US, it's not only encouraged, but expected, right? And to think of a place where that would not be the norm, Okay. So that's an example, I guess, of culture. Like I said, not my strongest example, but that's the one I'm going to use. Yeah. So I say this because as soon as you asked me the question, I had 3 different women come to mind. An African-American woman whom a lawyer I met in Colombia, in Medellin. A Latina woman who was light-skinned and very much struggled with her identity because darker skinned Latinas were saying that she doesn't understand the Latin experience because of how she looked. And the third one is a friend from India who lives in Prague, in Poland, or excuse me, Czech Republic. And all 3 of them have a hard time really embracing who they are because they're so steeped in their cultural norms. They want to break out. And we talk about how they can break out. And I'm not one to push. I give the thoughts I have. I'm not going to call it advice. You can take it as advice if you want, but I give my thoughts. You can take it for whatever it is. And then usually over time, it seeps in and they go, I get it. I get it now, right? But at the time, you give the thought, and they say, no, because blah, blah, blah. No, that's not me. And okay. But you put the seed in there, right? And over time, that seed starts to germinate. So I would say the top 3 things really would be to try to think outside of your box. That sounds cliche as I say it, but it's really so key, right? Most of us, so a third culture kid, and what that is, I'm a third culture kid. So if you ask me, yes, I'm Afro-Latina, I'm Afro-Caribbean, Latina. I am from the United States as well, but for me, being a third culture kid is how I identify myself. And a TCK is someone who has grown up in cultures outside of their parents' cultures because of their parents' occupation. And it has to be done during their formative years, so before the age of 18. And the reason that's important is because it changes your entire outlook. Your DNA practically is changed. You grow up thinking differently, and that is hard to break, right? And so when someone grows up in a certain culture, TCKs are really formed by their experiences because they often grow up in multiple cultures, right? So you have to kind of create a quilt of all the different cultures that you've grown up with to form the thoughts that you have. Whereas most people, we call them monoculturals. Often people say it as if it's a bad thing. But it's just a different thing, right? Or right. A different to us, right? So monoculturals tend to grow up with people who think very similarly to how they think, right? So if you think of the United States, of course, we think of baseball mom and apple pie. We think of the Pledge of Allegiance. And we can have different cultural aspects, like someone who grows up in Maine versus California versus Louisiana. They have different culture around them, but the foundation that they grew up with is very solidly the same, right? When someone is growing up in different cultures, that foundation is more like beach sand, and you're constantly trying to get your footing and decide who you are and how you fit in this picture, right? So the first thing would be to think outside of that box, because often the things you think are not the box are still the box. Right. Right? The second thing would be to invite feedback, right? Okay. I invite feedback all the time. And I've learned how to graciously accept it, examine it, and then decide if it will work for me. So that goes back to number 1. When I give a thought, you might listen. You don't have to do anything with that. But if you listen, then over time, one day, that's what she meant. I get it. If you don't listen at all, if you completely block off that opportunity, a nugget that you needed that may help in your development and your wisdom might be lost. And if you don't need the nugget, you could throw it away, right? It doesn't hurt to be open to listening. And that's the third thing I would say, is to be open. Again, this sounds very generic. But this is the key, I think, to hidden diversity. We're so based, especially in the US, but I'd say the entire world, on visual diversity. We make snap judgments on who we think that person is, how they're thinking, what they should be like by how they look, which has a place. I think that's important. Visual diversity is very important. As you mentioned earlier, we want people who look like us, right? It's like, girl, it's nice to have someone who looks like you that can relate to certain things, right? It's like having curly hair. Someone with straight hair cannot relate to the same things.
Right.
At the same time, when you're constantly open, I'll give you an example. I worked with this gentleman from Ethiopia, and he's a darker skin than I am. And we were talking at a diversity conference, and he was saying something, and I said, "Oh, well, tell me your cultural background." And he looked at me like I had 3 horns, like, "Can't you see I'm Black?"
Right.
And I read the room, and I said, I don't make assumptions about people based on how they look. So I need you to tell me what your background is. When I said it that way, he completely understood, especially because he was from a different culture, right? Yes. And he was used to people assuming he was African-American until he opened his mouth. And that was the difference between he and I. He had an accent. I don't. So the misconception continues even after I start talking. But when you give people the opportunity to open up, and you ask the questions, and you stay open, then there's a whole wealth of possibility for them and for you. So those are the things I think help. Go ahead.
No. Absolutely. And I was going to say, I was having this conversation with a woman, and I think she's the second episode in this final series. And she's from India, but grew up in the UK and then moved to the US. And of course, those boxes, right? Now she's, really put into those boxes, but she was saying how she appreciates learning about people. So when someone asks her, "Where are you from?" she's excited to tell you. Whereas in the US, folks who are third culture kids, or, they're from somewhere else, it's offensive, for someone to ask them, "Well, where are you from?"
Because often the assumption is, "Oh, well, you're not from here." Right? Exactly. Right? It's interesting. So here's how I ask that question, because for a TCK, that could be very traumatic. And here's why. I still sometimes, I do this work, and sometimes my friends see it. You'll catch me off guard. I mean, I'm in my 5th decade. Somebody will say, "Where are you from?" And then, silence, deer in the headlights. It's like, what's my answer today, right? Because as a TCK, often you learn that people don't want to hear the real answer. So what's the most palatable answer that you can provide, right? That person will not only understand, but accept. So often you see the answers changing. When I was younger, I used to always say the last place I lived, right? So when I went to college in Colorado, I would say I was from Colorado Springs, because I went to high school in Colorado Springs for a couple of years. And by the time so New York was our home base. I still have a home in New York. New York is where we went back. That's where our family was. Every time we went somewhere else, we went back to New York. Okay. So after a while, when I was no longer from that other city, I can't keep saying I'm from that other city. So I would just say I'm from New York, which I still do. Right. And so once I started doing this work, I said to myself, I'm shocked nobody questioned me. Like, as a first year in college, I said I'm from Colorado Springs. By the time I was a senior, people say, "Where are you from?" I'm from Brooklyn. Right. And nobody said anything. But that was the easiest way to give an answer that nobody balked about. Now, so what I usually ask people is, how did you grow up?
Okay.
How did you grow up? And then they go, because I also am inviting their story. I want to hear that story. And then they go into it, and I know, okay, there's nuance to this person. Because as you mentioned earlier, the layers, in this research, I call it dimensions, right? There's so many dimensions, and there's nuance to each of those dimensions. So as they tell me their stories, I'm like, aha. Yeah. And often I end up telling them some things about themselves, and their minds get blown. But every once in a while, people don't like it, because often some TCKs like the specialness of it. And to find out that there's other people like them, or that you might know more about them than they realize, that takes some of the specialness away, and they don't appreciate you very much. They're like, go away from my presence right now, please.
Yeah. So going back to the three women that came to mind. So the African-American woman is in Medellin, and then the Latina, where is she?
Say that again.
So you mentioned, the three women that came to mind for you, and you said the African-American woman is in Medellin. Where is the light-skinned Latina?
She actually was one of my students in college. Well, she wasn't my student. She sought me out at the university as
but in the U.S.
One of the professors there. Yes, in the U.S.
All right, yeah. And then a woman from India in Prague. So so the woman, the Latina, was she born in the U.S. or was she born outside? Okay,
yes. So she's Chicana.
Okay, so Chicana. So I won't really, look at her, but like the other two women, they're in totally different places from where they grew up, if you will. I'm assuming, right? The African-American woman is from the U.S. and here she is in Colombia.
Yes, she was. The woman from India, actually, now that you say that, we never talked about how she grew up, so I can't say that she was in a different place. Well, she was. I know she didn't grow up in Prague, so we could definitely say that.
So they're definitely, in totally different places. So for them to figure out their box, have you helped them to figure out their box? Like, what is their box? So
the toughest one to help, I was able to help the woman from India, the African-American woman. It was a little tougher. That was one of those where I stopped talking because I saw it wasn't going very far. But I stopped talking about that. We had a great conversation, but I had mentioned, so she brought up dating in Colombia and how it was difficult for Black women to date. And she said this about, and she gave examples of all these other women and saying that they're beautiful and intelligent and all this, and they're having a hard time. And I was like, I could not relate. I could not relate, right? And so we talked about what that looked like. And I was trying to present that she may be coming from an American perspective, and that's why this was happening, and she wasn't very open to that. And so your point is well taken, though, because that is it makes more sense, because her box is so much more expanded, if you can imagine, probably than anyone in her community, right? In her community back home. She's probably, I'm making assumptions, probably taking a step that most people around her either thought were strange or weren't used to, or wow, that's amazing. And so now her box is bigger. It's still a box, right? So how do we at least keep our boxes open to the possibility that how we see things and how we see a situation happening may not be how it's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's, yeah. So, all right. Well, good stuff on that. So I do want to pivot a bit. So I honor my late sister, author and poet Soul True, by asking about Dreams Deferred, which is the title of one of her books. Please share a dream deferred moment.
Oh, wow. Ooh, that gave me chills. So, I mean, I think I already shared one. It was the Spanish with my father, right? Sure. Yeah. Also, I would say the same things, polyglotness. Being a polyglot, right? Though it's so funny. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, okay, so do three languages count as being a polyglot? Like, one is, you're monolingual. Two, you're bilingual. Three, is that a polyglot, or do you have to have four? Are you multilingual when you have three? So just yesterday I was thinking about this. But honestly, I mean, I'm living my dream. When I say I believe I was born for this purpose, I really do. I actually was working on my PhD when this whole idea came to me, because it wasn't working as I expected it to. And I don't think it was supposed to work as I had, again, speaking of thinking outside the box, as I had envisioned. sometimes the plan for us unfolds and we thought it was supposed to be one way and it's a completely different way, right? So when I looked up, it was like, wow, my whole life, this windy road, this being born in New York, and before I could even talk, walk, any of the things, do anything really, I'm in Trinidad, and then I'm in Spain, and then I'm back in the US, and then I'm in Turkey and Germany and England. You know, it really developed how I developed as a person and how I see others. And when I look at my career, starting in microbiology, changing senior year to journalism, going into PR, ended up in marketing. My whole career has been media, marketing, and multiculturalism, right? And then all of that converging, also having a business, which is where our products come from, because I was CEO of a gift company that had products in, I think it was 28 countries around the world. So stores like Hallmark and the MoMA, the Getty Museum, the Met Museum in Sydney and in New York City. And all of and it just seemed like this windy road for a career, but it all came together so beautifully to create this and create it very easily. So yes, I feel like I'm living my dream, and the deferredness is the languages, but even though I had them then, I think really embracing being a polyglot like I always wanted to is something that was deferred and that I'm taking care of now.
Well, awesome. That is so awesome. And you kind of already jumped and answered the last question. But I'll just even ask it again, just in case there's anything different that you want to add to it. But this year has been a year of living a dream lifestyle for me. And different people define it differently. For me, a major component is travel. And when I say travel, it doesn't necessarily mean going to exotic locations. It just means if I want to go to the Met, I just pop on a plane and fly to New York, go to the Met and come back. What does it mean for you? And, again, you did share that you are pretty much living your dream lifestyle, but other than the things that you've already mentioned, how are you living a dream lifestyle?
So I agree with you 100%. It's about those experiences. So I actually made my list for next year.
Okay.
Next year, we really want to focus on sports. So sports and fashion. So New York Fashion Week, Milan Fashion Week, Wimbledon, Tour de France, FIFA World Cup, all those things. So those are I remember on the list used to be like Sundance and South by Southwest and the Cannes Film Festival. And every year I think of what have I not experienced yet that I can. And those would be my dream lifestyle items.
I love that. And you know what? So one place that I keep talking about that I want to go to is Martha's Vineyard. And
yes,
and when you mentioned the film festivals, because I know they actually have a Black film festival. But I just
yes.
want to go. Like it doesn't.
I should know the person who puts that on.
Oh, see, and you know what? I'm up here like, yeah, I definitely need to connect with her when we're done with this. We need to stay connected.
Yes.
A lot of these places she mentioned, I want to go because I love to travel and I love experiences, right? Events. I love to attend those different things. So we definitely have to stay connected. But before we wrap, what would you like to leave the audience with?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for this time. I really appreciate it. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Aww. Definitely. This was enjoyable. And what would I like to leave the audience? To stay open, to be love and spread that love around the world. And part of that is having empathy and understanding for others. And really, I believe that's the key to make a difference in not only our own lives, but the lives of others. And being someone who, we didn't talk about this, but not only, well, we talked about it a little bit, not only is in between, but in between in so many levels, right? It's difficult. You have a broad, a breadth of understanding of other people, but not very many people have that same breadth of understanding for you, right? And so it makes me even more empathetic to try to remember to stay grounded, stay open, listen to other people and where they're coming from and what that experience may be, so that you can enhance their lives, which enhances yours.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? It's been a pleasure talking to you as well. I've really enjoyed it and hearing all these different things. And my mind is has expanded just by listening to you. And like I said, I definitely want to stay connected and hop in, just fold myself up in your luggage when you travel. But I do want to shout out Jennifer Witter because she is who connected us. So shout out Jennifer. I love her. She has been such a supporter of the podcast, coming with these wonderful guests. As a matter of fact, the woman that I mentioned from India who lived in the UK and is now in the US, that's another connection that Jennifer made. So
wow.
I just love her and appreciate her, And again, I do appreciate you. And I thank you so much, Doni Aldine, for coming on the show today. And again, for those who are watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you. Continue to do so. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. Share so that we can elevate the voices of women of color all over. We thank you. And until next time, bye.
Oh, before I forget, you have an invite to my podcast, Destinations with Donie. I cannot wait to have you on.
I can't wait either. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.